Before I do, Mr. Pryor, can you do that?
I can, thank you, Mr. Wood.
And can the court and
I can.
Okay, Detective Hermosillo, do you recognize that exhibit, State's Exhibit 10?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's an aerial photograph of Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay. Again, what county is that in?
Fremont County.
Now, do you recall Mr. Daybell's address?
202 North, 1900 East.
Okay. Detective, you were, correct me if I'm wrong, you were talking about what happened that morning. You'd served the warrant on Mr. Daybell. And then I believe you stated that he had gotten in his vehicle. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And can you, Your Honor, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this with the COVID restrictions and plexiglass. So I guess we'll just take it as it goes.
If you're going to ask him to leave the witness, we'll call it the cubicle. I will ask Mr. or Detective Hermosillo to put his mask on when he goes out there to point at the. There's a laser light over there too, Mr. Wood, if you'd like him to use that.
That would be perfect.
Okay.
Can you make sure, Detective, that laser light works?
Yep.
Okay. And can the court and defense see that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wood.
Okay, Detective Hermosillo, can you point to where you observed Mr. Daybell in his vehicle, like you were describing?
Mr. Daybell was in this vehicle here, facing westbound. This is 1900 East.
Okay. Where were you standing?
I was standing right here, and then I was at Mr. Daybell's driver's door speaking with him, just briefly, asking if he needed a coat or anything out of the house.
Okay. And were you able to clearly view Mr. Daybell?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe when you were watching Mr. Daybell?
Mr. Daybell was on the phone, sitting in the driver's seat. He had the phone in his right hand and was intently continuing looking over his right shoulder. He would look over his right shoulder for a while, break contact, talk on the phone for a second, and then he would continue looking back over his right shoulder.
Okay.
Pretty intently over his right shoulder.
Did you have an opportunity to stand in roughly that same location that he had been in that day?
Yes.
Okay. For purposes of your investigation, did you attempt to orient yourself towards in the same manner that you viewed Mr. Daybell orient himself?
Yes.
Okay. When you did that, what did you see?
Well, the second time Mr. Daybell had got out of the vehicle and went to the back of his vehicle, he was wearing a hat. He stood at the back of his vehicle looking in the same direction he was looking when he was inside the driver's seat. He took off his hat, ran his fingers through his hair, looked down towards the ground, put his hat back on, went back inside the driver's seat of that vehicle.
Okay. Now, Detective, I don't think you quite understood my question. I apologize. Must not have been very clear. Did you ever stand in that same location that day?
I did. I was talking with Mr. Daybell while he was outside of his vehicle.
Okay. And did you ever orient yourself in the same direction that you viewed Mr. Daybell orient himself?
Yes.
And when you oriented yourself in that same direction, what did you find yourself looking at?
The north side of the property at the pond area.
Okay. Now, when you say the pond area, can you identify that?
This here is the pond area.
Okay.
And there's a tree just to the north, just on the outer side of the pond.
Okay. Now, Detective, you testified earlier you were there to serve a search warrant, correct?
Yes.
Who were Rexburg police officers involved in serving that warrant?
Yes, Rexburg was involved.
Were there other law enforcement agencies involved in executing that warrant?
Yes, there was.
Okay. What other agencies were involved?
Fremont County Sheriff's Department and the FBI ERT team,
All right. Do you know what ERT stands for?
evidence response team, or recovery team, I'm sorry.
Okay. Detective, I'm going to call your attention to that pond area that you just previously pointed at. Did you observe the ERT team engage in any activity on that spot that day?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What did you first observe?
I first observed the ERT team marking off different areas and grading different areas in the backyard of Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay.
Judge, could I have some time and foundation in terms of approximately what time did he observe that taking place?
I'll lay that
Yes.
foundation, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Approximately what time did you see that happen?
Roughly around 9 in the morning.
What time, and to further lay that foundation, what time did you arrive at Mr. Daybell's property approximately that day?
Approximately 7 a.m.
Okay. So you just testified that around 9 you saw them grading off certain areas. What did you observe after that?
I observed the evidence response recovery team and also cadaver dogs working the entire backyard. So they worked the pond area and then they had marked off other areas inside the backyard.
Okay. And again, at that pond area, what did you observe after you saw the cadaver dogs and the gridding?
They had found an area of interest and had started focusing on the area right underneath the tree.
Okay. And did you go over to that area yourself?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Were you able to identify yourself the area of interest they were looking at?
Yes.
Was there anything that stood out to you in that area?
Yes.
What was that?
There appeared to be, and this is just a guess, but about a 4x2 area of sod, what I can best describe as sod, in a shorter grass in an area of longer weed growth. So that 4x2 area stuck out based on the greenery around it.
Okay. And then what did you observe the ERT team do there?
They began pulling up the sod and topsoil.
And then what did they do?
They continued to methodically remove dirt.
Judge, can I inquire in aid of objection?
You may.
Judge, can I inquire as to whether the officer was specifically present at the time that these actions were taking place, or did he return back to Mr. Daybell's vehicle?
You may ask the question. Detective Hermosillo, I'm going to direct you to answer that question.
Yes, I was there.
You were there at the pond in the tree.
That is correct.
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Wood, you may proceed.
Thank you. I believe you just testified they started removing, I think you called it sod. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What did you observe them do what did you observe as they removed that sod?
They removed some topsoil that was right underneath the sod, which revealed 3 large white rocks, flat rocks.
Okay. And can you explain for the court how those rocks were oriented?
In a row. So there was a large rock, a large rock, and a large rock.
Okay. After you observed that, what did you observe next?
They removed the rocks, and underneath the white rocks was some thin wood paneling.
Okay. And what did you observe them do with that paneling?
They removed the paneling.
Okay. And then what did you observe?
Initially, as soon as they removed the paneling, I could smell the odor of a decomposing body.
Okay, Detective. I'm going to ask you some questions on that. Through your training and experience, have you had multiple occasions to be around deceased bodies?
Yes.
What are some circumstances in which you would, in the course of your duties, be around that?
In the last 19 years, I've been on plenty of suicides that had been left in apartments that were decomposing, various states. Also unattended deaths, various ages of people. So during the 19 years, I've been to a lot of those.
Okay. And is it your testimony that, to your perception, that state of a deceased body in some sense of decomposition has a specific smell that you recognize?
Yes.
Okay. And it is your testimony that you recognize that smell at that location?
That's correct.
Okay. After you noticed that smell, what did you observe?
I observed the ERT team methodically move away more soil from that area.
All right. And then what happened?
They removed some soil and there was once they removed some soil, there was a black, what I can best describe as a black plastic bag with a round object protruding through the dirt.
Okay. What did you observe the ER team do after you saw that?
They dug a little bit more around the round object, which appeared to me to be the crown of a head, protruding through the dirt. They used a small, sharp instrument to cut through the black plastic.
Okay. And what did you observe when they did that?
There was a white plastic underneath the black plastic, and they also used the white instrument to cut through the white plastic.
Okay. And what did you observe when they did that?
I observed what looked to be brown human hair.
Okay. Once that was discovered, what did you observe the ER team to? What did you observe the ERT team do?
They continued to just work around the head that was exposed. They took pictures. They did whatever their team leader instructed them to do.
Okay. Was an item of interest eventually pulled out of that area?
Yes.
And can you describe what that item of interest looked like?
It was what appeared to be a small body tightly wrapped in black plastic, covered in duct tape.
Okay. After that item was recovered, what did you observe happen with that item?
That item was then placed into the back of the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to observe what the coroner did with it?
Yes.
About what time of day was this?
Roughly 11
Okay.
in the morning.
What did you observe the coroner do with that item of interest?
The coroner brought the bag up to Madison Memorial, where it was placed in the morgue.
Okay. And were you in the vehicle with the county coroner, or did you observe that from another vehicle?
I was not in the vehicle. I was following directly behind the coroner's vehicle.
Did you ever lose sight of that vehicle?
No, I did not.
Okay. And did you watch that item of interest be placed in the hospital morgue?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Detective, while you were observing what happened at the ERT site, at that site we've just discussed north of the pond, did you ever leave that site for any purpose?
Yes, I did.
What did you do? Well, about what time did you leave that site?
Before noon.
Okay. And what did you do?
I assisted Sergeant Eric Wheeler in placing Mr. Daybell into custody off of a traffic stop.
Okay. Detective, after you observed the county coroner take that item of interest up to the Madison Memorial Hospital, did you return to the Daybell property?
Yes, I did.
What did you do there?
I assisted the other ERT members in excavating different areas on Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay. Can you show the court the areas you assisted in excavation?
And Judge, so that we have a clear record, could he also vocalize that as well, please?
That's fine. Mr. Hermosillo, I'm going to direct you to shine your laser pointer at that and also verbalize what you're describing, what you're pointing at.
I'm pointing to a fire pit on Mr. Daybell's property, just northwest of the fire pit. There is what we've referred to the pet cemetery, and it's just north of the pet cemetery where I helped excavate.
Okay. And that area that you just referred to as a pet cemetery, why did you call it a pet cemetery?
There was pets buried there.
Okay. Were you able to identify, you said they're pets, so when you say pets, are you referring to non-human animals?
That's correct.
Okay.
And Judge, could I inquire again in terms of aid of objection?
You may.
Thank you. Officer, you had mentioned that there were pets buried there. Can you give me the source of the information that advised you that there were pets buried there?
I assisted in digging them up. There was a dog and a cat.
Did you dig up the entire pet cemetery?
I personally did not dig up the entire
Did
pit.
anybody dig up the entire pet cemetery?
I can't answer that.
Were you there?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This line of question doesn't go towards any objection.
Well, he acknowledged that he had assisted in digging up a dog, at least a dog and a cat. He had mentioned pets. I think you ought to be able to inquire as to whether or not he went through the entire pet cemetery or not.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Detective Hermosillo, you can answer the question. Did you dig up the whole pet cemetery?
I personally did not. We were instructed to do different tasks. So when we started on one task, we would complete it and then we would move to something else. But there were several ERT members that were on scene that may have done that.
That may have done that, or did you observe anybody dig up the entire pet cemetery?
Again, Your Honor, this goes to a factual issue, not a legal objection.
Mr. Pryor, it appears that you're doing a cross-examination here. Which objection are you trying to lay foundation for?
Judge, I'll get the information through cross-examination. Let's move on.
Thank you. Why don't we take a brief recess? It is almost 10:30. We'll take a 15-minute recess and then we'll go back on the record at 11:15, so 10:45. All right. We'll go back on the record here in CR 2220-755, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. Court took a brief recess. It's now 11:15. The witness, Detective Hermosillo, is still on the witness stand, still under oath. We're still continuing with direct examination. Mr. Wood, you may continue to inquire.
Thank you. Detective Hermosillo, we were discussing your observations of the ERT team in an area that you've identified as a pet cemetery, correct?
That's correct.
For purposes of clarity of the record, I'm going to kind of skip back to a couple things. You've described Mr. Daybell's house as being in Fremont County, correct?
Yes,
And just for purposes of the record, that is Fremont County in the state of Idaho, correct?
correct.
You described Lori Vallow's apartment complex as being in Madison County.
Correct.
And again, for purposes of clarity of the record, that's Madison County in the state of Idaho.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, let's get back to where we were. You have testified that you observed the ERT team, and I guess that's redundant. I should just say ERT. The T stands for team. You observed ERT uncover the remains of what you believe to be a dog and a cat.
Correct.
What did you further, do you recall approximately what time of day that was? And yeah, what time of day was that?
It was early afternoon. I'd guess 1.
Okay. While you were in that area, did you have a chance to further observe ERT excavate that area you referred to as the pet cemetery?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe?
I had been away from that area, but when I returned to that area, they had already dug down and located what appeared to be a mass of burnt flesh and charred bone.
Okay. Do you recall approximately how deep down that was?
I don't recall how deep it was.
Okay. Did you observe ERT take that mass out of the ground?
Yes, I did.
Okay. This search that commenced on June 9th, did it finish on June 9th?
No.
Did it continue on to June 10th?
Yes.
Okay. When the search ended on June 9th, was the residence of Chad Daybell secured?
Yes, it was.
And do you recall, did you observe if security guards were placed there?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about June 10th. Did you observe that location? Let's go back to that pet cemetery location again. Did you observe any excavation being done on June 10th?
Yes, I did.
What did you observe?
ERT had gone back to the same spot where there was a mass of burnt flesh and bone, and began excavating around that the best they could.
Okay. And what happened?
They were ultimately able to dig completely around the entire mass to reveal what they were digging up.
Okay. And did they remove, again, that mass from that area?
Yes, they did.
Did you see what they did with it?
Yes.
What did they do with it?
They put it in a bag and placed it in the back of the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. Were there any other identifying features of that in that area or as part of that mass that drew your attention?
Yes, there was.
What was it?
There was a melted green bucket that it appeared that the burnt flesh had been placed in. Under the bucket was a partial human skull.
And was that bucket and what you've just described as a partial human skull, were those also, did you observe what was done with those?
Yes.
What was done with those?
They were also placed into a bag and placed in the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. And do you remember approximately what time those items were placed in the coroner's vehicle, approximately?
Afternoon, maybe 3 or 4-ish.
Okay. For the purposes of your investigation, what else did you do on June 10th?
I followed the Fremont County coroner, Fremont County Detective Vince Kaikamanu and Ron Ball. We went to Boise to the Ada County Coroner's Office with the remains that were recovered that day.
Okay. Did you, before you left to go to Boise, did you have an opportunity to go to the Madison Memorial Hospital in
Yes.
Rexburg?
Yes.
And what did you do there?
Recovered the remains found from the first day as well.
Okay. And you observed what you recognize as those same remains?
That's correct.
Okay. Detective, I'm going to call your attention to June 11th. What did you do in furtherance of your investigation that day?
We were at the Ada County Coroner's Office.
Okay, and let me stop you real quick. About what time did you get there?
We arrived there on June 10th.
Okay.
That day on June 11th, we got there in the morning.
And let's go back to June 10th really quick. When you arrived in Boise, what was the first thing you did there?
We went to the Ada County Coroner's office.
Okay. Do you remember approximately what time you got there?
Evening.
Okay. All right. And now back to June 11th. Approximately what time did you return to the coroner's office?
Early morning.
Okay. Detective, once you arrived on June 11th, what did you do in furtherance of your investigation?
Observed the autopsies of those remains that were recovered.
Okay. Now you've discussed two separate, I'll at this point call them items of interest. Did you recognize those items of interest again in the coroner's office?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you know if those items had been secured there the night before?
They had been.
Okay. Once you arrived in the autopsy room, what was the first thing you observed?
The first thing I observed was the black bag that was covered in duct tape that had been removed from the area underneath the tree by the pond, was placed on the table.
Okay, and you recognize that as the same black bag?
Yes.
How did you recognize that?
The duct tape and the black plastic that had still had dirt all over it.
What did you observe? Who was with you?
The medical examiner was in the room, Lieutenant Ron Ball, Detective Vince Kai Kamanu, and the Fremont County Coroner, Brenda Dye.
Okay. Was there a medical examiner there?
Yes.
Do you know who he was?
Garth Warren.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Judge,
Garth Warren.
And you've testified you observed those proceedings?
Yes.
Correct. Once that bag was, as you testified, moved to the table, what did you observe was done with it?
The ME grabbed a small sharp instrument and cut down the middle of the black plastic.
Okay. And what did you observe?
I observed a small child in red pajamas, red pajama shirt, red pajama pants, black socks that had the word Skechers in orange across the toes. I also observed a light and blue blanket that had been placed on top of it.
Okay. Detective, were there, when you observed what you perceived to be a child, was there anything that drew your attention?
Yes.
Can you describe for the court what drew your attention?
The amount of duct tape that was covering the body.
Okay. Where was that duct tape located?
On the head, arms, and feet.
Okay. Let's talk about the head area. When you looked at the head, what did you observe there?
The head had a white plastic bag over the top of it. It appeared to be a normal trash bag, had a red drawstring. It appeared to be the expandable type of trash bag with the waffle style pattern on top of the head.
Okay. And you had mentioned duct tape there. Where did you observe the duct tape?
There was duct tape that was tightly wrapped around this way, tightly from his chin to his forehead area. Several layers of duct tape tightly wrapped.
Okay. What did you observe the medical examiner and his team do with that material?
They ended up using a small sharp instrument and cut down the middle of it to expose what was underneath.
Okay, and when they exposed underneath, what did you observe?
An additional piece of duct tape that was stretched from jawline to jawline across the mouth.
Okay, and when you say across the mouth, at this point, were you looking at this child's face?
I was.
Okay. As you looked at this child's face, did you recognize this child?
Yes, I did.
How did you recognize this child?
From the hundreds of photographs and video I've seen over the last 8 months, I recognize that to be the same little boy that was laying on the table.
Okay, and can you, who was that little boy?
Joshua Vallow.
Were there any features that helped you recognize him?
Yes.
What were they?
He had the same style haircut that he had in the videos that I had seen and the photographs I had seen just prior to my welfare check with him in September, the last photograph I had seen on September 22nd. And that was shaved on the sides and longer on top.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other items of, were there any other items of interest to you on that body?
Yes.
Can you just, what were they?
His hands were folded about chest high,
Detective, can you lift that a little bit higher so that we can see?
folded like this, chest high. He had duct tape continuously wrapped from elbow all the way around his arms, over his hands, all the way to his right elbow. Several layers of duct tape that were tightly wrapped. And the best way I can describe it is he had a ball of duct tape over where his hands would be.
Okay. Was that duct tape removed?
Yes, it was.
And what did you observe after that?
His wrists were also bound with another layer of duct tape.
Okay. After that, was there anything else that caught your attention about the way this child was found?
Yes, I noticed that his ankles were also bound with duct tape as well.
Okay. After you observed that, did you observe the autopsy of that child?
I did.
Okay. Detective, upon the conclusion of that autopsy, did you witness another examination that day?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember approximately when that examination started?
In the afternoon.
Okay. What did you observe in that second examination?
I observed the same melted green bucket with the charred flesh and charred bone that was located on Mr. Daybell's property that was now sitting on the table in the medical examiner's office.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer, I'd like to go back to the initial contact with Mr. Daybell.
Mr. Pryor, will you pull that microphone closer to your
I
mouth?
apologize, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, officer?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the initial contact with Mr. Daybell. And again, in November, when was that date, sir?
The initial contact with Mr. Daybell was on the 26th of November, 2019.
At approximately what time, officer?
Early morning hours, around 9, I would say.
Okay, was that contact recorded?
It was not.
Is there a reason why you didn't record that contact?
It's not common practice for detectives to carry body cams.
Is it common practice for detectives to record conversations with witnesses when you interview them?
It is.
Can you understand why it's important that an interview with a witness is recorded?
Yes.
And it's important to record a witness or an interview with a witness so that we get the factual statements made by people recorded accurately. Would you agree with that?
I would.
And it's important that when we make statements and we make representations regarding statements that people make and observations, that they're accurate observations, right?
That's correct.
And one of the best ways to do that is to record those observations. Would you agree with me?
I would.
Okay. This was somewhat of an important case, was it not?
Not at that time. It was just a welfare check.
Okay. And then this welfare check turned into an interview with Mr. Cox and Mr. Daybell, however, correct?
Correct.
At any time, did you think that maybe you should have recorded this?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you record any of the other interviews with any of the other witnesses throughout your investigation?
I did.
And whose interviews have you recorded?
Melanie Boudreau's interview.
Then let's stop there. How many times did you talk with Melanie Boudreau?
Objection, this exceeds the scope of the direct.
Mr. Pryor, before we go any further, I'm hearing a shutter. Can the media please turn off the shutter sound? It's impeding my ability to hear the attorneys from both the state and the defense. Mr. Pryor, let me go back there. Mr. Wood, the objection is based upon exceeding the scope of the direct. Mr. Pryor, I'll let you respond to that objection.
Well, Judge, throughout his testimony, he made at least a couple of references to interviewing other members of the family and having conversations with them about various facts in this as part of his testimony with Mr. Wood. Quite honestly, if he's talking as Mr. Boudreau is one of those folks that he gained information from, one, I'm going to get into what information did he gather from them, and two, whether or not that's been memorialized in the form of a recording. So I think it is relevant, and I think quite honestly, it's permissible inquiry in this particular case.
At this point, Your Honor, he's asking for hearsay information, and again, he's way outside the scope of what Detective Hermosillo testified to.
Mr. Pryor, as it pertains, I think there were a couple questions as to a search of an apartment that belonged to Miss Boudreau. I think that there was some brief questioning about questions of family members, but as far as the depth of those conversations, your objection was that they were hearsay. I agree with Mr. Wood, they are hearsay. Tell me where you're desiring to go. If you're just laying some foundation or getting some information about the communication, when it happened, etc., I think that that's completely relevant and it's completely within the scope. If it's beyond that, tell me what your argument is.
Well, Judge, quite honestly, I'm not necessarily seeking the exact information that those particular witnesses provided to this officer. What I'm trying to seek is a timeline as to exactly who he spoke to and when, and where he gathered this information. And as part of seeking that information as to who he spoke to, when he spoke to as part of this case, I would like to know whether or not that's a recorded conversation, so I am afforded the opportunity to look at what this officer testifies to today and compare it to what those recordings are. And I think it's important that I be afforded that opportunity, and as part of this, it's a preliminary hearing. Preliminarily, I would like to know whether or not this officer recorded the conversations.
With that, I will allow the questions pertaining to who he spoke to and when he spoke to them, whether or not they were recorded. But as far as the substance of those conversations, I will sustain the objection that Mr. Wood has raised as far as hearsay.
All right. You spoke with Melanie Boudreau, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how many times did you speak with her?
One time.
And when was that, sir?
December 3rd, 2019.
Was that as part of the investigation of the welfare check?
Yes, it was.
Okay, was there any other inquiry in there as to, were you at that point, had this moved into an area of trying to decide whether there had been any foul play with JJ or Tylee?
I was asking Miss Boudreau how we could get a hold of Mr. Daybell or Lori Vallow.
Okay, and that's to inquire as to the whereabouts of JJ at that time?
That is correct.
What about Tylee? Had it moved into that as well?
I did ask about Tylee.
Okay, at this,
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. He's now asking for information from those interviews. It has nothing to do with the scope of the direct examination.
I'm not asking for information from Ms. Boudreau. I'm asking what this officer did as part of his investigation. Judge, we've just spent 2 hours listening to this officer talk about all of the steps in detail that he's done as part of his investigation. I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to ask some very basic questions about what witnesses he interviewed as part of that investigation. I can't even fathom how that's not allowable inquiry. And I think quite honestly, I don't know if Mr. Wood doesn't want to give me the information, or if this officer doesn't want to give me the information, but clearly I ought to be allowed to inquire as to what this officer did as part of his investigation.
As it pertains to the inquiry of whether or not Tylee Ryan was discussed, I'll allow that question. I'll have the officer answer that question. The deeper substance of that conversation, I agree, is beyond the scope.
Was part of your inquiry to discuss Tylee as well?
Yes, it was.
So this had gone beyond the welfare check of JJ. It had gone to, we're trying to find out if there's any sort of issues regarding JJ and Tylee at this point. Is that correct?
We're trying to find their whereabouts.
Okay. And at that point, were you concerned about their whereabouts in
Yes,
December?
we were. Yes, we were.
Were you significantly concerned about their whereabouts in December?
Yes, we were.
Okay. Was that conversation with Melanie Boudreau, was that a recorded conversation?
It was.
Okay. And you provided that to the prosecuting attorney,
Yes.
as well as a statement of your complete interview with Judge, I heard a noise, I'm sorry.
I think it was someone's chair.
Okay, as well as a complete dissertation of what that interview involved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in December, it was important that you record that conversation. What other family members did you discuss the case with? Let's try Garth. Did you talk to Garth?
I didn't personally talk to Garth.
You did not?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you talk to Emma?
I did not personally talk to Emma.
Did you talk to Melanie Gibbs?
I did talk to Melanie Gibb.
You did?
Yes.
How many times?
By what date, sir?
How about from the time you started investigating this in November until yesterday?
Your Honor, this is far beyond the scope of the direct. Preliminary hearing, as the case law states, it's in no sense a trial. Not a trial. It does not require the same formality and precision observed at a trial. The state is not required to put on every bit of evidence it has. And the scope of the cross-examination should be limited to the direct. At this point, defense is using this as a fishing expedition to try and find out everything that they may want to know, but that is not the subject of this preliminary hearing. This is a probable cause hearing. That's why we're here. It's not a hearing for the defense to ask every question they may want to ask.
And Judge, when a prosecuting attorney elects to spend 2 hours with a witness going into what I call significant detail about every aspect of this case, at that point, this prosecuting attorney opened the door to allowing me to inquire about all of this stuff. Quite honestly, he doesn't get it both ways. He doesn't get to say, I'm going to have this officer talk in great detail about every facet of this case from the beginning of his investigation through the end, all the way to the autopsy, and say, oh, Mr. Pryor, I'm now going to object to you inquiring and seeking information about the steps that were taken as part of this investigation from beginning to end. He doesn't get it both ways. It works so that I get a fair opportunity to inquire of this officer. I'm not asking of substance of those witnesses. I understand, and I understand completely the hearsay rules. But quite honestly, Judge, I'm dumbfounded by the fact that he's objecting, because I'm trying to find out who this officer spoke to and whether or not those questions and those conversations were recorded. This is not delving into specifics about each of the individual witnesses. I clearly should be permitted to go down this road.
All right, the court's going to take a brief recess here. I'm going to look at one thing that I have a question about. We're going to take 5 minutes, and then we'll go back on the record and proceed with the cross.
All right.
We'll go back on the record. CR 2220-755, State versus Daybell. Court took a brief recess. For the recess, there was an objection made by the state. That objection was based upon going beyond the scope of direct examination of Detective Hermosillo. Mr. Pryor responded with the argument that he was inquiring into facts of the investigation. The court initially overruled the objection and stated that I would allow the questions pertaining to who was spoken to, whether that conversation was recorded, when the conversation took place in the course of the investigation. I will stand by my ruling that I will allow Mr. Pryor to continue to inquire of the witness as to that state of the investigation. When it comes to the substance of those interviews or inquiries of the witnesses and or family, I'm going to sustain Mr. Rob's objection going forward that those will be unallowed or disallowed based upon hearsay. I think there's also a scope of the direct that would also come into play at that point. So Mr. Pryor, if you'd like to proceed with the questioning of Mr. or Detective Hermosillo on cross, you may do so.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, when we were on the subject of Melanie Gibb, you spoke with her as well, is that correct?
That's correct.
Was that a recorded conversation?
I think one of them, the last one was.
Well, you,
When I spoke with her, we were on the phone. She was in Arizona and I was on a cell phone.
did you ever have the occasion? Now, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, officer, my notes seem to reflect that you said you spoke with Melanie Gibb once. Was I incorrect in my notes?
No, I had spoken with her once in person.
Oh, once in person, okay.
And then on the phone the rest of the times.
Okay, and the date that you spoke to her in person, where was that location?
That was in Salt Lake City,
And the date of
or
that?
Provo, I believe, Provo.
And that discussion in Salt Lake City was on what date, sir?
I don't recall the date.
Okay, all right. Now, you said it was Salt Lake City, it was Provo, was it not?
It was Provo area, yeah.
Provo area, not Salt Lake City, correct? And as part of that discussion, you drove down to Salt Lake City to interview her, is that correct?
That's correct.
And accompanying you on that trip was Lieutenant Ball, is that correct?
That's correct.
And also accompanying you on that trip was Mr. Wood, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you have any recollection of during that one-to-one face-to-face interview between you, Mr. Wood, Lieutenant Ball and yourself and Melanie Gibb, was that recorded at any time?
I believe Lieutenant Ball had recorded that conversation.
You believe or you know?
I believe he recorded the conversation.
You did not record it.
No, sir.
Who was the head investigator of this investigation at this point?
I was the lead investigator,
Okay.
but he was the supervisor on scene.
Okay, and as the lead investigator, you chose not to record that conversation, is that correct?
I did not record that conversation.
And as the lead investigator, you chose not to record that conversation. That was an affirmative decision not to record the conversation.
Objection asked and answered.
I didn't get the question.
Sustained. You can move on, Mr. Pryor.
And then there was a phone conversation with Ms. Gibb, is that correct?
That is correct.
When was that?
That was in December sometime.
Is there a reason you don't know the specific dates? In a number of instances here, we've had occasions where you seem to suggest the month, but you don't know the specific date. Is there a reason behind that?
Those weren't super important dates to me. I interviewed a lot of people throughout the last 8 months.
Okay, and as a preparation for this hearing, did you review your reports and your supplements as part of your preparation to testify today?
I did.
Okay. And in spite of reading that supplement and refreshing your recollection, you still don't remember the specific dates and times?
Sir, forgive me. I can't remember every single word for an 8-month investigation on
Right,
dates and times.
And with all due respect to you, sir, I'm not questioning your integrity and I'm not questioning your honesty. But quite honestly, there's a lot of information here, is there not?
There is.
And there's a lot of things that are said as part of this investigation, is there not?
There is.
Okay. And I'd like to go back to the time on November 27th, I believe, or maybe was it 26th? I'm sorry, it's November 26th. And even myself, I get dates wrong. But on November 26th, when you interviewed Mr. Daybell, you said that Mr. Daybell said he didn't know Lori Vallow very well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It's not recorded. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is it possible that he said, I know her? And you said, how well do you know her? And he responded, well, I don't know her.
Objection, hearsay.
I'm asking a question as to whether this is possible he said this. And if he's going down the road of hearsay, Judge, this has already been ruled on.
Your Honor, it calls for hearsay.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Mr. Pryor, you may continue with the question. I believe the question was, is it possible?
Right,
I'll
is it
allow that
possible that
question.
Mr. Daybell said, I don't know her as well as Alex?
No, that's not what I remember.
Okay. But you've already acknowledged that your recollection and the number of facts may not be completely accurate. Is that correct?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you have a clear recollection of every statement made by every single witness in this case, sir?
Objection argumentative.
I'll allow the question.
Do you have a clear recollection of every statement of every witness made in this case, sir?
No,
Do you have a clear recollection of every date and the substance and time of every date as part of your investigation in this case?
Objection relevance.
Mr. Pryor,
It goes to his recollection, it goes to bias, Judge.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You may answer the question, Mr. Detective Hermosillo.
would you ask it again, please?
Just the recollection of every date and time in this case as part of your investigation.
No, I don't.
And you would agree with me that it's possible that Mr. Daybell said that I don't know her as well.
Objection
as
asked and
Alex knows
answered.
her.
Mr. Pryor, there's an objection as to asked and answered.
Judge, I laid the foundation and went down the same road, but the question is slightly different. Is it possible that you made a mistake about whether or not Mr. Daybell stated what you claimed he stated?
Mr. Wood,
Your Honor, at this point, defense is clearly trying to get in a statement of his own client. That's hearsay. There's no exception for it. If he wants to get in Mr. Daybell's testimony, he can put Mr. Daybell on the stand.
I'm going to sustain the objection on the ground that it's been asked and answered. I think it was asked the exact same way. I don't think he answered it in the way that you wanted him to answer it, but it has been asked and answered. Let's move on.
Now, officer, your testimony originally was that the last time that they saw JJ was the 22nd of September.
Objection, that's vague reference to they. Doesn't state who that is.
So the objection is to foundation.
Yes.
Mr. Pryor, do you want to lay a little bit more foundation before engaging in a conversation on that date?
As part of your investigation, you were able to ascertain a date based on reviewing pictures and evidence of when you believe the last time JJ Vallow was seen. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And as part of your testimony to today, you said you believe that the last day was the 22nd of September. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, as part of your investigation, did you contact JJ's school?
Yes, we did.
And as part of your investigation, were you able to ascertain the last day that the school had him registered and attending school?
Yes,
And that was the September 23rd, was it not?
that is not correct.
Would it surprise you to learn that there are statements about JJ Vallow attending school on the 23rd?
Initially, we talked to the school and we had an unexcused absence on the 23rd, but an excused absence on the 24th. So in the initial part of the investigation, we believe that JJ may have gone to school on the 23rd, but later learned that was not the case.
And as part of your investigation into that issue, did you record that conversation with any of the officials?
I did not personally speak to the school.
Do you know who spoke to the school?
Detective Dave Hope.
Now, you talked and made reference to hundreds of pictures and videos. Do you remember saying that?
That is correct.
Did you provide those hundreds of pictures and videos to the prosecuting attorney?
I assume that he had gotten the photographs that we have gotten.
Okay, but that wasn't the question. The question is you made mention of reviewing hundreds of photos and hundreds of videos. Okay.
Through-
Objection, I think he's misstating the witness's earlier testimony.
Mr. Pryor, will you repeat the question? And Mr. Wood, if you believe he is misstating the witness's testimony, I'll allow you to make the objection again.
Judge, the witness had previously said that as part of his investigation, he looked at hundreds of videos and pictures. I'm inquiring as to whether or not all of those videos those hundreds of videos and hundreds of pictures have been provided to Mr. Wood as part of this case?
I'll allow the question. I'll direct the witness to answer.
During the course of the investigation, there have been numerous people that had played YouTube videos, friends that had uploaded things to the internet, things of that nature, which we saw Tylee or JJ on. The videos and photographs that we had obtained, the prosecutor has copies of.
Okay. But then other videos that you've used as part of your investigation that were on YouTube. And when you're talking about these videos, you're talking about people in the community who have posted videos and audio, who have, this has drawn a significant amount of local attention. Would you agree with me?
I would agree.
And there's been a significant amount of people posting videos, posting pictures, posting audio in Fremont and Madison County. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yes.
Now, as part of your search warrant